It was during the retreat of the 80,000, on the day when ruin and disaster came so near that their shadow fell over London far away. And, without any certain news, the hearts of men failed within them and grew faint, as if the agony of the army in the battlefield had entered into their souls. On this dreadful day, then, when 300,000 men in arms, with all their artillery swelled like a flood against the little English company, there was one point above all other points in our battle line that was for a time in awful danger. Not merely of defeat, but of utter annihilation. There comes a moment in a storm at sea when people say to one another, "It is at its worst. It can blow no harder." And then there is a blast 10 times more fierce than any before. And as the heat of the day increased, so did the fury of that terrific cannonade. There was no help, it seemed. The English artillery was good, but there was not nearly enough of it. It was being steadily battered into scrap iron. All the morning, the German guns had thundered and shrieked against this corner, and against the 1,000 or so of the men who held it. If this angle were crushed and broken, then the English force as a whole would be shattered, and Sedan would inevitably follow. So it was in these British trenches. There were no stouter hearts in the whole world than the hearts of these men, but even they were appalled as this 7 times heated hell of German cannonade fell upon them and overwhelmed them and destroyed them. The shells came on and burst, and tore good Englishmen limb from limb, and tore brother from brother. "500 of the 1,000 remained. And at this very moment, they saw from their trenches that a tremendous host was moving against their lines. As far as they could see, the German infantry was pressing on against them, column upon column, 10,000 of them. A grey world of men. There was no hope at all in these British trenches. They shook hands, some of them. One man improvised a new version of the battle song, "Goodbye, Goodbye to Tipperary," ending with, "And we shan't get there." And the few machine guns did their best, but everybody knew it was of no use. "World without end," said one of the British soldiers as he took aim and fired. And then he remembered a queer vegetarian restaurant in London, where he had once or twice eaten eccentric dishes of cutlets made of lentils and nuts that pretended to be steak. On all the plates in this restaurant, there was printed a figure of St. George in blue, with the motto, "Adsit Anglis Sanctus Georgius." May St. George be a present help to the English. This soldier happened to know Latin, and now, as he fired at his man in the grey advancing mass 300 yards away, he uttered the pious vegetarian motto, "Adsit Anglis Georgius." As the Latin scholar uttered his invocation, he felt something between a shudder and an electric shock pass through his body. The roar of battle died down in his ears to a gentle murmur. Instead of it, he heard a great voice and a shout, louder than a thunder peal, crying. His heart grew hot as a burning coal. It grew cold as ice within him. As it seemed to him that a tumult of voices answered, he heard, or seemed to hear, thousands shouting. And as the soldier heard these voices, he saw before him, beyond the trench, a long line of shapes with a shining about them. They were like men who drew the bow, and with another shout, their cloud of arrows flew, singing and tingling through the air towards the German hosts. The grey men were falling by the thousands. The English could hear the guttural scream of the German officers, the crackle of their revolvers as they shot the reluctant. And still, line after line crashed to the earth. The singing arrows fled so swift and thick that they darkened the air. The heathen horde melted before them. In fact, there were 10,000 dead German soldiers left before that salient of the English army. And consequently, there was no Sedan. In Germany, the great General Staff decided the contemptible English must have employed shells containing an unknown gas of a poisonous nature, as no wounds were discernible on the bodies of the dead German soldiers. But the man who knew what nuts tasted like when they called to themselves steak knew also that St. George had brought his Agincourt bowmen to help the English.